Wisconsin Child Care Center, Part 1. In 1885, the Wisconsin state legislature set aside $30,000. This money was used to establish a state public school for dependent and neglected children. The Board of Supervisors wanted to follow the model of Coldwater, Michigan State School established in 1874. They chose a 165-acre location in Sparta due to good water, rich soil, an attractive location, and proximity to the railroad. Additionally, the school would create jobs and boost the local economy. Within 4 years of opening, 2,221 kids had passed through the doors, and the school was quickly running out of space. The school was originally only intended to be a holding place for abandoned, neglected, or needy children between the ages of 3 and 16 years old. In 1901, the school began to allow children under the age of 3, and 16-year-olds were sent back to the community they came from. Ultimately, children were placed in homes, indentured out, fostered, or adopted. The campus continued to grow to meet the needs of the children there. Wisconsin Child Care Center, Part 2. The Child Care Center was greatly overcrowded even within a few years of opening. The Child Care Center matrons felt that 20 to 25 children was an acceptable amount per cottage. However, each cottage housed 50 to 60 children. Despite the addition of new cottages, overcrowding was a persistent problem. Between overcrowding and exhausted resources, it isn't hard to understand how illness spread so rapidly through the Child Care Center. Medical care was extremely limited in the facility. Each child had an examination upon admission and a 2-week quarantine to prevent the spread of disease. The infirmary handled simple examinations, first aid, minor procedures, and general care. The hospital, however, was used more to isolate than to treat and to prevent the spread of disease to the other children. This is likely why 305 children are buried on the premises. Adoption was rare. Children were typically indentured out and used as laborers on farms. Families could indenture a child for years for only $50. Wisconsin Child Care Center, Part 3. When the Great Depression hit, the Child Care Center had a harder time placing children. Families could barely afford to feed their own children, let alone take another in. Many of the children in the center had problems and were difficult to place. This led to even more overcrowding. By 1921, legislators and officials began to realize that not all children would find a placement outside of the center. The state provided more funding, allowing for the expansion of services, including building more facilities as well as hiring more teachers. Initially, children left in the center became permanent dependents of the state of Wisconsin. Parents could not get their children back. In 1923, a law was passed to allow parents to reclaim their children so long as they agreed to counseling. Officials began to study the children in the facilities. This led to the advent of free homes, which were essentially foster homes where families were reimbursed for caring for children. Reunification became the goal. Treatment plans now included the opinion of the doctor, the cottage matron, the teacher, psychologist, and psychiatrist. Wisconsin Child Care Center, Part 4. In 1929, a boarding program was established. Families could pay a fee and send their special needs child to the school. By the 1930s, the center had begun to focus on staff training. Employees received 2 weeks of education on how to care for children, including those with special needs. They were also instructed on appropriate and effective discipline, primarily in the form of loss of privileges. If a child was too troublesome, they were transferred to the Boys and Girls School in Waukesha. In 1932, an official infirmary was established. This allowed the children regular access to medical and dental care. By the 1960s, the goal of the Child Care Center had changed. The Child Care Center was the only place in Wisconsin for juvenile delinquents under the age of 12. It was divided into 2 separate facilities on one premise. One, the Child Care Center, which housed neglected, abandoned, abused, and relinquished children, and the Annex, which housed children with special needs. Wisconsin Child Care Center, Part 5. The Child Care Center closed its doors on July 1, 1976, after serving the community for 89 years. Children who remained in the home at closure were moved to foster homes in the local community. The buildings and facilities were sold to the city of Sparta for $650,000. Some of the buildings on the campus have since been demolished. In 1982, the city of Sparta received tax increment financing to construct an 18-hole golf course adjacent to the Child Care Center. The land this golf course was constructed on was previously farmland, used to feed the children who lived in the center. The golf clubhouse now sits where the barn used to. Part of the stipulation of the sale was that the grounds needed to be maintained, but this only included mowing. The cemetery, which holds 305 bodies of the children who died at the Child Care Center, is still accessible to the public so long as you check in at the clubhouse. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding the Child Care Cemetery over the last couple decades.